Chapter 11. The Queen. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Compass Carburetor looked around, seeing many people seated on the sides on extravagant seats, seemingly part of the nobility. And, standing behind each were what seemed to be puppets, judging by how they were made of iron and seemed to be moving according to their commands. The nobility at the end only had one puppet behind them, while those closer to the throne had two puppets each behind them. And finally, seated on the throne was the Queen. And standing behind her were 5 puppets. A single glance determined that the quality of each of those 5 puppets far outclassed the rest of the nobility. Judging by the atmosphere of the place, the Queen had absolute authority. She was tall, standing at 6 feet, possessing a well-toned body judging by the streamlined arms that were ripped with power. Her orange eyes glinted with authority while her orange hair glistened under the light. Even though his eyes tried to involuntarily stare at her giant breasts, Compass Carburetor controlled himself, unwilling to act in any manner that might spell him his death. Once he glanced around, an idea began to brew in his mind. So, he was cautious, not looking anywhere else as he made eye contact with the Queen for a moment before closing his eyes to present with a formal bow. So, the Queen stared at his figure from top to bottom, looking at the quality fabric of his clothes, his handsome figure, then noticing his slightly disheveled face and the dirt on his clothes. How did you appear in my hallway without alerting any soldier? You might not believe it if I said. Compass Carburetor put on a helpless expression as he awkwardly scratched himself. Though, the moment he raised his hand to do that, the guards around him pointed their swords at him while he noticed through the corner of his eye that all the puppets in the place had jerked once, ready to take action. I'll be the judge of that. The Queen stared at him without blinking an eye. Have you heard about a country named Platopia? He started with a question first. Are you from that kingdom, Platopia? The Queen frowned, unable to recall the name of any place with such a name. She didn't think about it for long, interested to see what the mysterious individual before her would say. She was also ready to strike him down the moment he tried anything funny. I'm the prince of that kingdom. Compass Carburetor put on a rather pained expression, using the term prince than a king since appearance-wise, he only looked around 20 years old, or at least, I was until now. Followed by a sigh, he spoke. I was in a forest with some of my trusted soldiers when we came across a mysterious individual. And for some reason, my soldiers began to drop dead one after another. And before I knew it, I was in this hallway. What was the name of this forest? The Queen stared at him, looking at his expression all along to see any hints of lies. Platopia National Forest, Compass Carburetor said as a matter of fact. As part of the business world, lying was a skill he had learned through numerous trials. So, making up one on the spot was easy for him. And, as he didn't have a clear understanding of their world, he didn't go into any specifics, acting like he didn't wish to spill his kingdom's secrets while still giving vague details based on what he had observed. It was to make his recount realistic and somewhat believable. He didn't plan on making a perfect story, since if he followed his setting as a prince of a kingdom, talking in a manner that perfectly explained his situation was odd in itself, since he might be mistaken for a spy that tried to infiltrate their palace. Also, he wasn't sure of the value of a map in the place. If it wasn't in a modern setting like on Earth, maps would have considerable value since they would usually contain details about routes into a kingdom, the terrain, etc. That would be perfectly helpful for an invading country or for spies to infiltrate. As he was dealing with the ruler of a nation, his actions should be well-grounded but also tinged with a sense of arrogance and natural air a prince of a kingdom ought to have. Compass Carburetor put attention to details as an ex-merchant. And once he said his piece, he looked at the Queen, giving her a blank stare that made it seem like he was just tired of everything and didn't seem to be plotting anything. Let's consider for a moment that everything you said is the truth. The Queen made eye contact. What will you do next? Return to my kingdom, of course. Compass Carburetor nodded. As a matter of fact, I still have unfinished business to take care of in that place. He quickly spoke. I don't know where I have arrived at, but if your majesty can transport me to my kingdom, I will definitely reward handsomely. My father, the king of Platopia, values me the most out of all my siblings. Guards, escort this gentleman to one of our guest rooms. The queen commanded as she looked at Compass Carburetor. We'll discuss this later. I thank you for your generosity, your majesty. Compass Carburetor gave her a formal bow as he followed a couple of guards and exited the throne room. All along, the queen stared at his back, deep in thought. As Compass Carburetor walked along the hallway, he came across numerous statues along the way. Does this world revolve around statues or the sort? He didn't ask any question that might look suspicious as he simply followed the guards and was soon escorted to a room within the palace itself. Upon entering it, he noticed the room was quite luxurious, spanning a length of 10 meters and a breadth of 8 meters. Once he entered it, the guards left and closed the door. Chapter 12. Weird Architecture. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. The moment he entered the room, Compass Carburetor quickly scanned around, noticing that it seemed like a normal room, except for the weird aesthetics of the place in that there were humanoid figures carved into the pillars at the corner of the room. He judged they were carved because they weren't lifelike and only spanned a centimeter thick protrusion. So, he determined they wouldn't be the puppets from before that could try to assassinate him during the night for political reasons. Still, I have to be careful. That talk before was just the first of the tests. I am still a suspicious individual, so the queen would probably try a couple of other things to probe me. He thought, walking a little as he came across a full-length mirror, noticing his appearance. As he had been called for an interview, he was fully dressed up for the occasion. So, the clothes he wore were of the finest quality fabric. And now, it had become dirty. But the moment he looked at it, the first thought that came to his mind wasn't his appearance. The cause that dirted my clothes was the soil in the system world. If they were carried over with me, does that mean I can bring items of the system world with me? He pinched the end of his pant, rubbing the bit of mud that came off as he inspected it. Looks no different to regular mud. He then noticed the window in the room and walked towards it, peering through it as he noticed a training ground. It seemed the barracks was situated there and soldiers were currently training. Compass Carburetor noticed the soldiers held what was a small cylindrical rod in their hands. It had a slight curve to it that allowed a better grip as they held it. Each cylindrical rod ranged between 10.20 centimeters in height depending on the individual. And, what was shocking was the fact that a mysterious energy of sorts exited from the rods and had been shaped into a weapon each that they wielded during their training sessions. Some formed shields using the rods as a handle, some formed swords where the rod formed the hilt, etc. And soldiers training with each set of weapons formed their respective groups, forming a mechanical drill. As it seemed interesting, Compass Carburetor watched them in amusement, soon noticing in surprise when the swords of some of the soldiers fluctuated for a couple of seconds before vanishing. The respective soldiers sighed as they were punished by the drill instructor to run a couple of laps around the training grounds. Soon, the weapons of many soldiers fluctuated similarly before vanishing. The drill instructor sent them away to rest in the barracks when another group assembled before him. He continued to make them repeat the same as the previous batch. After seeing them for a while, Compass Carburetor thought, interesting. He then heard a knock on the door before a couple of servants entered inside. Compass Carburetor smiled wryly as they didn't even ask for his permission and simply entered the room. Welp, I'm just a suspicious guest and not someone they have to honor while staying. One of the servants made a formal bow in his way as she said, Her Majesty has asked for your presence during the evening session. Please change into this set of clothes after you take a bath first. We'll notify you when it's the time to visit. He nodded, glancing at the set of clothes to see that they were made from a material resembling silk. They then arrived beside him, beginning to remove his clothes when he waved his hand in a hurry, speaking, I can do this myself. They nodded and stood a couple of steps back, continuing to stare at him silently. Even though he was used to the attention and the stares of people, it was still embarrassing enough. He then looked around, heading into the bathroom as he took off his clothes while inside and then left his clothes out, thinking for a moment as he pointed at his shoe and watch, not clothes. The two servants stared at the closed door for a good while before one of them approached it and picked up the clothes placed on one side. The other servant picked up the watch and the shoes before leaving the room. A couple of minutes later, they returned and stood in their previous spots, silently staring at the bathroom door. Once he entered the bathroom, Compass Carburetor sighed as he looked around to see something that resembled a bathtub. There were a couple of pipes for water flow. He experimented with them, seeing that one was for hot water and the other was for cold water. There also seemed to be a solution in a bottle beside that worked similar to soap. Well, that works. Sighing, Compass Carburetor took a bath and refreshed himself, finally draining the water when he looked around, noticing that there were no towels around. He then gently peeked out the door by craning it open a little to see the servant standing beside, a towel in hand. Taking it from her, he quickly dried himself and took the clothes from her next, looking at the first thing he always wondered about during such stories, sighing in relief when he noticed there was an underwear. He then pinched its ends first, stretching it a bit while inspecting it thoroughly from all sides, finally heaving a sigh of relief at the end. It's a new one. Once he dressed himself in the weirdly designed robe, he exited the bathroom, noticing the two servants bow once as they took the towel and exited the room. We'll inform you later when it's the time to make an appearance. Once the door closed with a thud, Compass Carburetor looked at the place where he left his shoe, realizing that his shoes and watch had disappeared. Frowning at his oversight, he arrived at the door and pressed the doorknob, realizing that it was locked. Chapter 13. Watch in Trouble. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Followed by a clicking sound, the door was opened from the other side as a guard looked at him. Is something the matter? Yes, Compass Carburetor nodded. The servants from before have taken two of my items that shouldn't be washed. Can you make sure they aren't washed? Upon seeing the guard continue to stare in confusion, he said with an urging tone, or, call them first. I'll talk to them. Give me a moment. The guard called another guard to fill in his place as he hurried over. Compass Carburetor used the chance to take a better look at him, spotting a cylindrical instrument strung to the side of his hip. It was similar in design to the ones used in the training grounds. So, that's probably the main form of weaponry in this world. How strong and effective are they, though? Compass Carburetor wondered as he waited. Soon after, a servant arrived and made a formal bow towards him. It seems the servants from before have committed a mistake. We'll return your items shortly. They are probably wondering about what the watch is and the material my shoe and clothes are made out of. He thought, waving his hands, saying it was fine as he closed the door. He then arrived at the window once again, gazing out to see two soldiers standing a wide distance apart from each other. Then, a wooden puppet walked from each side, standing next to them. It seemed they were controlling the puppets. And upon their signal, the wooden puppet sprinted, engaging in a fight. The quality of wood was cheap as they seemed to be created with the intention to spar as training. So soon after, the wooden puppets began to form cracks, showing signs of breaking. They stopped the fight at this point as the two soldiers retreated with their respective puppets. Soon after, another two soldiers walked out as their respective wooden puppets fought. For some soldiers, their puppets lost energy to fight mid-way, slumping down to the ground. The training instructor punished the respective soldiers, telling them to run 2 laps around the training ground. After observing them for some time, Compass Carburetor concluded, it seems everyone here has some form of energy in their body. Some use it to manipulate a puppet to fight for them while others wield it using that cylindrical instrument to create weapons to fight. And, wielding each type requires energy and they can sustain operation only as long as the energy in their bodies lasts. Quite an interesting method of operation, he nodded in thought, wondering, but, it seems those cylindrical objects function as a handle of sorts while the weapon forms around them. But, is it possible to create guns using that? Or, does the created weapon depend on the type of cylinder used? I still don't know many things about that. He continued to observe them until the evening when he was summoned by the servant. This is probably another probe of sorts, I guess. Thinking as such, he followed the servant, accompanied by a couple of guards on his front and back. As they held blades, his back felt like it could be pricked upon any time, so Compass Carburetor was feeling a bit alarmed. He didn't have any guarantee that the guards wouldn't swing their blades at him. Moreover, even while moving, he was still aware of his surroundings, intending to react the moment they proceeded in a direction that seemed less decorated. Based on the documents and stories he had read, most castles were also equipped with dungeons to cage nobility or the like, sometimes even torture spies and criminals. Depending on the kingdom, the dungeons varied from a locked-up cell to the worst of nightmares. He hadn't summoned Anthozoa, his gun, or shown it to anyone yet. He didn't know if anything like a camera or their equivalent existed in this world. So, he didn't wish to reveal his trump card to anyone. Besides, summoning it was instantaneous. So, he could instantly condense it in his hand when he wished to shoot someone. Though, there were only 5 bullets in it, since he had shot the 6th one at the portal. So, if his enemies were beyond 5, he wouldn't survive. I have to learn this world's mode of power first. Thinking as such, he ensured his face didn't display any suspicious motions. He walked based on his character setting, following the servants to a door that was relatively normal looking as compared to the throne room's sprawling entrance. Upon arriving at the door, one of the servants gently knocked using the door knocker, a ring-shaped item with the face of a human engraved at the end, forming a small protrusion to make it seem a bit realistic. It was still a miniature carving, so it wasn't real. The door parted way as a servant peeked from the inside, scanning the faces of everyone before nodding. The servants that had accompanied him motioned at the door, "Please enter. Her Majesty is waiting inside." "All right," nodding, Compass Carburetor entered inside, internally sighing in relief upon seeing that he hadn't entered a cell or anything of the sort. It was a lushly decorated room with a table placed on one side, filled with a variety of food. There seemed to be a dance floor in the center, attached to a balcony on the opposite side that overlooked a training ground. The training ground seemed different to the one he saw before. It contained numerous apparatuses to help in training. The other end of the room was a study, adorned with books on the shelves that were arranged akin to a library. And placed beside it were a couple of chairs overlooking a table. Currently, the Queen was seated on the chair, wearing a monocle to help her read through a massive book with tiny letters filling up the pages. She seemed to be searching for something. And upon seeing his arrival, she smiled a little, beckoning for him to come and sit before her. Upon seeing her hold his watch, Compass Carburetor smiled wryly. Chapter 14. A truthful conversation. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Compass Carburetor smiled wryly, taking a seat opposite to the Queen. Once he sat down, she looked at him with a deep gaze. "I'm interested in knowing more about you. Your Majesty, as long as it isn't something too personal, I will talk." He smiled, thinking it was better to proceed in such a way so that he might be able to bargain with her for some help in learning about her world's power. The Queen then waved the servant that was lighting a pair of candles to leave them alone. Followed by a bow, the servant left. Now, there were only the two of them in the place. Compass Carburetor noticed that the lighting source wasn't candle-based, but of an instrument embedded with a stone of sorts that emitted light on its own. It seemed the candles were lit for aesthetic purposes. Aromatic candles, helps in calming the mind and learning. The Queen smiled upon seeing him look at the candles. "I always use them while surfing through books." Speaking of books, she pointed at the watch. "This timer, was it created in your kingdom?" "We don't specialize in such products." Compass Carburetor shook his head, saying, "It was a gift from my father. I don't know from exactly where he bought it." He said it like that in case the Queen wished to establish a trade for the watches. He wouldn't be able to comply since Platopia didn't exist in reality after all. "Where exactly is your kingdom located?" the Queen asked. Until now, she hadn't expressed any notion of expression against him that would put him under pressure. But, that only made him appreciate her intelligence and cunning. Whether or not he was telling the truth, she was being careful so that her actions would only benefit her in the future and not cause harm to her or her kingdom. Is there any scenic landmark in this place? Either here or in this region? Compass Carburetor asked. Do you know about Pachuki Mountain? She asked. What is it famous for? Compass Carburetor acted like he was trying to think hard about its name, seemingly like he might have heard it or something similar before. Darble, the queen said with a solemn tone, frowning immediately when Compass Carburetor looked like he didn't know anything about it. She didn't frown because he was ignorant about the mountain, but because he was ignorant about Darble, the primary material that was used everywhere in their world. It was the material used to power a puppet or condense weapons in an armament. So, even the poorest of the poor would know about the word Darble. And to think the man before her seemed oblivious to such a simple fact caused her to feel suspicious about him. How did your kingdom function? What kind of power did they harness? The queen asked next. Her question immediately made him realize that he might have given away his ignorance before. So, without any hesitation, he iterated another response he had planned for such a situation. I don't exactly know how it functioned before my grandfather's time. But during his reign, too many assassins tried to assassinate him. And, they were all from commoners who were dissatisfied with his rule. With a sigh, he shrugged. As the commoners could grow strong enough to threaten him, he passed down a rule to never train one's body in the art of battle. After that, all weaponry in any means to gain power were banned from our kingdom. Any problems had to be solved using pure fists alone. It was easy to implement since ours was a secluded kingdom and didn't have any enemies. Is that why he was staring at the soldiers training in interest for almost the entire time? The queen thought, amused for a moment before her tone turned serious as she asked, for what reason have you arrived here? I was transported to this place. Compass Carburetor replied naturally. Upon seeing his spontaneous action and noticing zero differences in his facial expression, the queen was mentally caught off guard. The truth serum should have already kicked its effect by now. It's a new dose, so there shouldn't be anyone that would have immunity against it. That means, he is now speaking the truth. Will you pose any harm to this place? She asked next. Nope, Compass Carburetor replied as a matter of fact. Do you wish to return to your kingdom? She asked. Of course, Compass Carburetor nodded. Why? She asked. To save my daughter. Compass Carburetor replied when his eyes widened in surprise, for a moment thinking why he had answered as such. I see, so it indeed kicked in. He was just speaking the truth spontaneously and hadn't realized it. It seems this man really has been transported here through some mystical means. The queen then looked at him, staring hard at him, asking, if given a choice, will you be my ally or enemy? An ally, of course. He replied spontaneously, now realizing something was indeed amiss as he stood up in alarm. In truth, if he was asked such a question, he wanted to answer in such a way as to maintain a neutral stance. That way, he would be able to reap enough benefits while not be dragged into the kingdom's politics. It's all right, the queen laughed a little as she waved her hand relaxedly. I was testing you by using some truth serum. I hope to have your understanding. My position is like that. And you were indeed suspicious. As long as I don't have to engage in a survival run from this place, it's fine. Compass Carburetor sighed as he judged that the queen showed no signs of suspicion against him now, at least to a cordial extent. Slumping back on the chair, I'm not a fan of fights, to be frank with you. It's fine, the queen chuckled, the both of us can only be frank in such a situation. So, she too is affected by it. Upon thinking as such, Compass Carburetor asked immediately, am I still under suspicion? Definitely, the queen smiled, but, I won't surround you with guards constantly like today. She then got up and headed to the other side, snuffing out the candles as she took 2 glasses, pouring in a drink as she brought them, offering one to Compass Carburetor. "Here, have a taste of this. This is a speciality of our region. Consider this a hospitality from my side since I hadn't treated you properly until now." "Thank you." Compass Carburetor took the glass, gazing at the lavender-colored liquid inside, taking a sniff of its aroma as he spoke, "Sweet, fragrant, the culture of a foreign land." The queen was just about to say something when she noticed his face flushed red, as if he was intoxicated by alcohol, causing her to stare at him with a dumbfounded expression as her eyebrows twitched. Chapter 15. The Abandoned Prince. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. The queen got up from her seat, standing before Compass Carburetor as she looked at his condition. "He's completely drunk. How is this possible? All he did was sniff it once." She gently patted his shoulder, seeing that Compass Carburetor was trying his best to respond to her but was slowly losing consciousness. Soon, he fell asleep. Upon seeing his actions, she burst out laughing. "This guy's interesting." She then brushed his hair to the side, looking at his face as she sighed, "With such a handsome appearance, if you hadn't been born a prince, your life would have been hell. Damn it, I am the prince of this blasted kingdom. You hear me? Prince. I'm the prince." Rigreal shouted as he was dragged out of the palace by a couple of guards. Arriving at the entrance, they dumped him into a carriage, looking at the driver as they nodded. A couple of guards were already seated inside the carriage, grabbing hold of Rigreal the moment he was thrown inside, constricting him with a rope. The carriage immediately began to move, reaching the end of the city soon after. It looked no different to an automobile, only less sophisticated in appearance. The driver held his hand above a certain marble sphere while inserting his energy into it, using it to fuel the vehicle and make it move. Along the journey, the guards laughed, "To think we would have the honor to board the royal carriage. It's all thanks to Sir Scourge here." Another guard slapped the back of Rigreal as he laughed. "I dare you to touch me again, pleb. I'll have you executed." Rigreal cursed as his face turned red. No sooner than when he said it, his face turned pale as an impact had slammed into his stomach, causing him to gasp for air. It seems Sir Scourge here is still under the illusion of being a prince. The guard retracted his fist, smirking as he displayed a hint of anger in his eyes. "You have spoiled the lives of numerous innocent girls. You'll get your justice soon." Once they reached the end of the city, the two guards carried Rigreal into a horse-drawn carriage. The carriage left the capital city, crossing the well-paved roads and trod into the mud road, heading towards the edge of the kingdom, intending to head into the neighboring kingdom. Upon seeing the route they took, Rigreal's eyes widened as his face paled, fearing the worst when the guard patted his back. "Relax, you won't be killed. You'll be married off to a noble from the Dedicus kingdom. You have been perfectly useless as a prince, so at least contribute to our kingdom this way. I heard the noble lady he'll be marrying has a fetish of collecting the skulls of men." The other guard snickered. "Human skulls. Damn it, not her. Not that psychopath." Rigreal cursed mentally as he tried to wriggle out his way. But, he was unable to overpower the guards who easily subdued him. He had never trained all his life. And due to a lack of exercise, he was fat, lacking the strength to even carry his own weight for more than 20 steps. Against the veteran guards that had experienced a couple of wars, he was nothing. It was evening by the time the carriage left their kingdom border, heading into a forest path. Their kingdom wasn't big by any means, only spanning a maximum length of 260 kilometers and a maximum breadth of 140 kilometers at a stretch. And, the capital city, Elipster, was situated only 40 kilometers from the border, so the carriage crossed the border soon, despite traveling on a mud path. Rigreal had resigned himself to his fate. Even if she were a psychopath, as long as I have a status, I can enjoy my life without worries. As long as she's not too ugly, I can put up with her. But, his thoughts were soon shattered when he noticed the oddly shaped trees and the snow-covered ground, shuddering as he shouted, "This is not the way to the Dedicus kingdom. We have entered the Heroica Empire. Bingo. You aren't entirely stupid then. The two guards chuckled. You said I'll be married off to that psychopath noble lady in the Dedicus kingdom. Regriel shouted as he tried to wrestle his way out. Silence. One of the guards shouted in irritation before slamming his elbow into Regriel's thigh, causing the other party to shut up in pain. It was our plan at first, the other guard said, but you are no longer a prince. So, we can't marry you off to nobility. The queen said you were better off dead, just like the rest of your useless siblings and the king. What? What happened to my father? Regriel stammered in shock when the carriage stopped. The two guards dragged him out and slammed him to the ground. Regriel felt difficulty in even getting up on his own as a guard snickered before propping him up into a kneeling position. Trash is best disposed of properly. Regriel despaired as he heard the guard's voice. But, the moment he stared before her, rage filled him as he shouted at the silhouette that had appeared before him, General Artica. You bitch! You had sworn loyalty to the king. How dare you point your blade at the royal family? What have you done to my father, the king? There was a group of 4 standing before him, all veiled except for the one named General Artica. Though, she hadn't worn her armor at present, only dressed in commoner clothes to make it seem like the work of bandits. As for the other 3 behind her, they seemed lifeless, her puppets. Upon hearing his shouts, General Artica nonchalantly dug into her ears, looking uninterested as she motioned at the guards. One of them took out a knife and cut the rope binding him. But, Regriel tried to get up and run when he noticed his legs were in pain, having traveled for so long, seated in the carriage. He didn't have enough strength left in him to run, only able to stutter as he said, "Spare me, L.RG." General Artica took out a cylinder and inserted her energy into it, creating an energy sword as she flashed it. Regriel saw the blade in her hands, despairing as he could hear derisive laughter around him. But right when he had given up all hope, he heard a sound in his ears, one that seemed like his lifesaver. Ding! Chapter 16. Slave Harem System. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Ding! The sound felt heavenly as Regriel noticed the time around him had almost stopped. But, he could see the energy blade moving towards him slowly, so it was apparent that time had only slowed down. What's happening? Ding! Activating Slave Harem System, status. Host's life is threatened. Host, do you wish to use the beginner package? A system. Regriel thought, moving his mouth to see that he wasn't able to speak. He then thought, trying to communicate through the mind, are you a system? I'm the Slave Harem System, host, time is running short. Do you wish to use the beginner package? I have nothing to lose by this point. Only this might save me. Regriel thought in a hurry, I'll use the beginner package. Ding! Extracting beginner package, obtained core, skill. Harem Slave, level 1, obtained 1. Time. Use skill. Harem Slave, level max, ding. Do you wish to use the 1. Time. Use skill? Harem Slave, level max, Yes. Use it. Regriel bellowed mentally, noticing a mysterious energy of sorts accumulate on his right hand. Ding. Host, please select your target. Upon seeing the blade nearing him, Regriel thought hurriedly, the 2 guards are weaker than General Artica. And most of all, they are male. There's only one option then. General Artica. His right hand immediately moved forward and touched the skin of General Artica. The mysterious energy condensed in his hand seeped into her body through the skin, instantly coursing through her body before causing the areas of her crotch and neck to glow. Regriel noticed a tattoo in the shape of a collar appear on her neck when the world around him returned to normal, causing him to scream as the energy blade stopped right before beheading him. There was a tiny cut on his neck as he screamed in pain. But, the energy sword didn't behead him. What happened, General Artica? The two guards were confused upon seeing the look of confusion on her face. What happened? General Artika frowned as she tried to move her hand and behead Rigriel, but for some reason, intense pain assaulted her from her heart the moment she thought of it. The pain wasn't physical, but was an emotional one, as if she was executing her beloved. Memories flashed through her mind, recalling the first time she met Rigriel. He was being a jerk as he lecherously ogled her all along, staring at her breasts proactively. At that time, she felt humiliated by his gaze, wishing to do nothing else but slash him into pieces. After that, on numerous occasions, Rigriel always tried to harass her. All the time, she made an excuse and vanished from the scene. And, she had tremendous hatred against the man that didn't value a soldier like her that had shed blood for the kingdom but rather treated her as a woman that should have been his plaything. But now, when she recalled the same thought, her opinion changed mysteriously. He was just interested in me. When I was young back then, he looked at me, only me. And even now, he's still looking at me the same. This isn't lust. I just misunderstood him because of his facial expression. Rigriel is a kind man. He just loves me dearly. Yes, I love him. Her thoughts were rapidly twisted, and before she realized it, she had thrust her sword forward, piercing it into the chest of the nearby guard. What are you doing, General Artika? The guard screamed in shock as he tried to extricate himself. He pulled out his weapon, intending to condense his energy blade when the one piercing his chest expanded, severing him into two. The other guard had become alert as he condensed his blade, getting ready to parry her attack when the three figures behind General Artika moved, jumping towards him before attacking him. He hurriedly deflected the attacks of the three puppets, flinching at the power behind each blow that threatened to destroy his energy blade. When he noticed his hands were weightless all of a sudden, intense pain assaulted him. General Artika had sneaked to his side and severed his hands. Before he could shout, she plunged the blade through his head, pulling it out as she flicked it once. What about the carriage driver? She quickly turned around, noticing a galloping horse. The carriage driver had spontaneously removed the harness and rode a horse, intending to inform the queen about her betrayal. No, I shouldn't allow him to return. She thought, commanding her puppets to move when suddenly, intense sounds of laughter resounded from behind her, startling her. Ha 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 ha. Rigriel fell on his back, feeling the soft snow as he laughed at the top of his lungs. Damn you, Ant. You stripped my father of his power and even tried to assassinate me. I'll take revenge on you. General Artika hurriedly arrived beside him, propping him up with care as her eyes were filled with a gentle gaze. Are you okay, dear? Dear. Holy heck. This is amazing. To think the ever-beautiful and devoted General Artika would call me that. Slave harem system, is it? Amazing. Amazing. Rigriel thought as he looked at General Artika in close-up, taking in the visage of her beautiful face as he inhaled her scent, getting intoxicated by it as he pulled her close, planting his lips on her. Beov, General Artika was startled by his sudden action. But, she didn't resist, closing her eyes as she slowly wrapped her arms around Rigriel. She's not resisting. Rigriel noticed as he was overwhelmed with euphoria, weaving his way through her clothes as he entered her, finishing his task within 3 seconds as he grunted in exhaustion. General Artika looked at him with a blank stare, disappointed. That's it. Of course not. Upon seeing her beautiful figure, Rigriel stood up once again and entered her, staying within for another 3 seconds. You need to train. Yes, ma'am, Rigriel said with a dejected tone. But internally, he was roaring with laughter. To think I can do it with General Artika, the General Artika of all women. Ha 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 ha. He then summoned every essence of his being and willpower to last another 3 seconds. Chapter 17. A System's Magic. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Panting on the snow-covered ground, Rigriel asked while gasping for air, have my siblings really been executed? Yes, General Artica nodded, you were the last that remained. As for the king, he's been poisoned so that he couldn't be active. Your mother and the second wife have been imprisoned from the day the current queen, the third wife, came to power. As they are only under house arrest, rumors didn't float around. How come I never knew about all these things happening in the capital? Rigriel was shocked. You were simply wasting money on the prostitutes. And you never cared about anything other than that. She looked at him in mockery, and, your siblings were killed under the pretext that they were headed to join the warrior academy in Heroica Empire. The queen would later announce that they met an untimely death during their training. She'll probably use a stand-in for them and announce the deaths of everyone one after another slowly after she had fully stabilized her authority. Why is she doing this? For power, of course, General Artica nodded as a matter of fact, but, the fact of the matter is that all the princes and princesses birthed by the first and second wife lack talent. All they have done was live prodigiously and waste the kingdom's resources. The queen attributed it to the king's lacking genes, same for the first and second wife. That's why she did this. And, her children are indeed quite talented, enough to become as strong as me in the future. Rigriel facepalmed as he breathed in and out, looking like he was angered by the fact of his siblings' demise, but internally, he was thinking something different. General Artica's character remains the same. The only thing that has been flipped is her emotions towards me. Just for that, she even betrayed the queen, someone she had been following since young. He laughed, this is one fearsome power. System, ding. Display my status. As you command, host, level 5 slave harem system, host. Rigriel Entropica, physique. None, skills. None, core skill. Slave harem, level 1, enslaved. Artica Striker, there was a flood of information in his brain as Rigriel understood the usage of his core skill. Slave harem, level 1. The slave harem skill allows me to enslave anyone into my harem member. As I'm a man, it seems to only be effective against women. I need to touch their skin for the skill to take effect. But at level 1, I need to remain in contact with their skin for a total duration of a day before I can enslave a woman. He nodded, grinning, thankfully, I have General Artica. She's a strong ally and incredibly beautiful. Only the queen's prettier than her. But with my system, I will enslave the queen and her daughters too, haha. He grinned, slipping his hand into General Artica's shirt, kneading the hill within. We have to leave soon. General Artica said while blushing, pinching Rigriel's cheek, the driver had run away while you were messing around. If he managed to inform the queen, we'll be doomed. Rigriel immediately broke out of his reverie, sweating in tension as he was flustered. What shall we do now? Relax, General Artica said as her gaze turned sharp, I'll protect you from all harm. She pointed at the 3 puppets behind her, I brought all 3 of my puppets. Unless the heads of other major noble houses arrive or the queen personally makes a move, we won't come under harm. Right, General Artica is the head of the Striker noble house. And, even among the 4 noble house heads, she's the strongest. So, unless the queen personally takes action, I won't fall under harm. Rigriel thought as he relaxed a little, where shall we escape towards? Even the queen won't dare to send troops into the Heroica Empire. We'll seek refuge there. General Artica said, patting Rigriel's back as she consoled him, relax, with me around, you won't go hungry. I'll gather more people in the Heroica Empire and strengthen myself. Then, I'll destroy the Entropica kingdom and enslave the queen. Ah! How I wish I could fondle her mountains already. He laughed lecherously, fondling the hills of General Artica. 2 of her puppets arrived and carried him. General Artica commanded the final puppet to destroy all traces as she fished out the weapons from the 2 guards and salvaged anything she could find. Her puppet then carried her and began to run through the forest at tremendous speeds, quickly leaving the place as they entered the territory of the Heroica Empire. It was late into the night as the queen was still in the study, looking through some of the older documents that involved research about the puppets. She was studying methods to better her fighting prowess, even though she was already the strongest in the kingdom. After studying through it for quite some time, she removed her monocle, massaging her eyes as she felt strained and tired. Closing the books, she got up, stretching a little as she muttered, "I hoped he would have some knowledge from his kingdom that would allow me to break through my current limit." After Compass Carburetor fainted, she commanded her servants to return him to his room, continuing to study after that. "Well, he seems genuine and has an air of grace and authority around him. He's definitely not simple. I should treat him well." Suddenly, her servant arrived and stated, "Your Majesty, we just received a report. The assassination of Regriel has failed. General Artica has betrayed us." "What?" The queen was unable to rein in her composure. "Impossible. General Artica is my most trusted friend. How can she betray me? What about the Striker House? Did they take any action?" "The Striker House is in a panic because of this issue. It seems it was General Artica's decision alone." The servant said, "The driver who had accompanied Regriel is standing outside, Your Majesty." "Bring him in," she said, watching a servant bring in the driver, who immediately kneeled and said, "Why, Your Majesty? Tell me everything that happened." The queen looked at his disheveled state, her gaze turning sinister as she heard everything the driver said. Chapter 18. Controlling Anger. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. It was morning the next day as Compass Carburetor woke up, feeling groggy as he stretched his arms, getting up as he rang a bell, watching the two servants from before enter with a new pair of clothes. He took all the items, entered the bathroom, and freshened up. The clothes this time was pretty high up in the unusual category. There was a gray skin tight cloth that completely covered everything below his neck, save for his fingers. Above it was a gown with fitting sleeves but loose in the rest of the places. It was a mixture of dark magenta and purple, with the symbol of a flower in orange printed on the back. The shoes seemed to have been made of silk, as it was soft enough to make him wish to sleep instantly. The dressing sense of the place was different from Earth, but attributing it to the different culture, he adjusted to it. The material was of fine quality and it allowed him to move freely. So, he was comfortable wearing that. "Her Majesty is summoning you," the servant said as Compass Carburetor nodded, following her lead. The queen was seated in a dining room where a variety of dishes were being set up. She sat on her seat, hearing the report from her servant, so, the two of them escaped into Heroica Empire. "Artica, why did you betray me?" she thought, worried because she had lost her strongest general. It instantly placed her kingdom at a disadvantage. And, General Artica had escaped with her 3 puppets. They had been created by expending most of the wealth of the Striker noble family that she was the head of. So, her leaving with the 3 puppets was a major blow to the family, something they couldn't recover from for at least a decade or 2. "What does General Arnica's husband have to say for this?" she asked her servant. "He's been kneeling in the throne room, Your Majesty," the servant said. "All right," the queen nodded, dismissing the servant as her mood was foul. Anger seethed within as she was unable to understand just why a friend that she had shared dreams with since childhood and someone who she had stood alongside with during numerous battles would betray her, and that too with Regriel, who she had publicly expressed disdain towards. General Arnica had been an upstanding general of her kingdom, strong in her pursuit of justice, and flawless in her conduct. She had numerous admirers among the army for her upstanding values and conviction. She was her kingdom's pillar. So, it made 0 sense for her to abandon their kingdom just like that and flee with someone she abhorred. As she was butting heads with her thoughts, Compass Carburetor arrived. A simple glance at her state allowed him to understand that something had happened. After all, her mental state was pretty worse enough that it was obvious to see. From his previous conversation, he knew that the queen was smart and cunning. So, no matter what, she was able to hide her emotions perfectly and act as the situation deemed fit. But now, she was unable to maintain it as her emotions were leaking out, showing how much she was affected by whatever had happened. Unwilling to offend her by stating anything inappropriate, Compass Carburetor made a formal bow, "Your Majesty. You've arrived," she sighed once, motioning at a chair next to her, "Take a seat." Compass Carburetor did as he was told, pausing for a couple of seconds before he said, "You seem troubled. Is it that obvious?" She blinked her eyes a couple of times before smiling wryly. "Indeed," Compass Carburetor nodded, "something serious must have happened to shake you up this much." "So," she took in a deep breath, "hypothetically speaking, why do you think a trusted friend would betray you, even going to the extent of abandoning her family to do so?" Compass Carburetor thought for a moment, either I might possess a treasure valuable enough to make it worth a betrayal, or she might have been brainwashed or mind controlled. "Do you think something like that is possible?" the Queen said as she gazed at his eyes. "Yes, Compass Carburetor, but, just because it is possible doesn't mean it can be achieved easily. Tell me the context of the situation. I can give my opinion based on that. It's good that I proclaimed myself as a prince. The Queen is even asking me for advice on national matters." Compass Carburetor thought, thanks to that truth serum, she knows that I pose no threat to her and am an ally of her. Her probing worked in my favor this time. In my kingdom, we have 4 noble houses. Each noble house has a lot of power. And, the strongest of each noble house holds the position of a general in my army. The Queen said as nerves visibly protruded on her neck, showing that she was barely managing to control her anger. It was to the extent Compass Carburetor was able to feel her killing intent that numbed his body. She hadn't even emitted her actual killing intent. It was just a tinge that leaked out while she was suppressing her anger. Even that made his body shiver. After all, Compass Carburetor hadn't killed anyone. So, he was weak to killing intent, despite having a trained body akin to an athlete. Seeing his reaction, the Queen recalled his background, understanding that he was weak to killing intent, controlling herself immediately as she spoke, and, "General Artika, the strongest general in our kingdom whose power is weaker only to mine, has betrayed me and fled along with a prince to the neighboring empire." Compass Carburetor thought as he spoke, did this prince and General Artika share any feelings for one another? Grew up from childhood, General Artika is 32 years old while the prince, Rigreal, is 17 years old. They shared no common history. Rigreal is a scourge that played with the chastity of many girls and had even harassed General Artika on numerous occasions to the extent she almost hacked him to death several times. There is only hatred between them. Chapter 19. Advice and Sincerity. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. After hearing everything the Queen had to say, Compass Carburetor looked around once, asking, "Where is the rest of the royalty?" "The king's sick while his other wives are under house arrest. As for the numerous princes and princesses, I killed them," the Queen said frankly, looking at Compass Carburetor shudder once. He then asked, "But why? Is it because of a problem with the succession?" "There is that too, since I was only his 3rd wife." The Queen nodded, "But the main reason is that all of them didn't realize the threat our kingdom faces and simply continued to eat through the royal treasury. They have also committed enough atrocities to the extent the common populace was planning a rebellion. So, I killed everyone who was problematic and took the throne for myself." "Was General Artika part of the group that killed the problematic people?" Compass Carburetor asked. "She was my right hand. She executed all the princes and princesses herself. It was because I trusted her wholeheartedly that I left the task to her." The Queen expressed her sadness, sighing. "Last question," Compass Carburetor turned serious, "was Prince Rigreal the fat man that was dragged out from the throne room when I arrived?" "Yes, him." The Queen nodded, watching Compass Carburetor's face beam with a smile instantly, puzzling her. "BDNV, then it's simple," he spoke, "General Artika hasn't betrayed you." She's fallen under his control. Unless he's killed, she'll behave like a different person. Is this the truth? The Queen's eyes widened in shock upon hearing him state it with such confidence. Yes, you can use the truth serum to validate it. Compass Carburetor nodded, and, I'll be frank with you. I was speaking the truth yesterday, but I hid some things from you. Prince Regriel is my target. Through him, I'll be able to reach my home. But, Regriel has no talent in anything. And, how was he able to control General Artika? Even if he found some evidence that might target some guilt of her past, she could have easily killed him to erase all evidence. And, she had gone to kill him in the first place. Also, she had stopped only when her sword cut a bit into Regriel's neck. That's because he's a Psy, Compass Carburetor said casually when he gasped for air as intense pain emanated from his heart, turning his face beet red as he began to sweat profusely while his body temperature continued to increase. Danger. He felt an intense sense of danger surpassing the deer system he had seen in the system world. It was the part of the money-making system that had become his, warning him that if he continued to speak any further, he would mysteriously die. Are you okay? The Queen was alarmed, hurriedly getting up as she noticed Compass Carburetor's complexion visibly change. She touched his face, retracing her hand in reflex. He's burning up. Compass Carburetor raised his hand, weakly signaling that he was okay as he took in deep breaths, continuing to do so as the pain slowly subsided. His completion soon returned to normal as his body temperature cooled down to normalcy. That makes sense. So, talking about systems is taboo. Now I see why, despite knowing about systems, the residents of this world would think of it to be fiction. It's similar to how it was on Earth. If I hadn't obtained the money-making system, I too would have just treated them as fiction, and not part of reality. He thought. So, if I assume based on what Forth said, the first generation of systems that enter a world would spread ideas about systems in that world through the form of media. So, they might also use some of their powers to restrict information about systems from being leaked out to prevent people from knowing they exist in reality. Maybe that's why I felt that intense sense of danger. Right, in all the stories I read, none of the main characters ever divulged that they possessed a system. They either lied their way through it or blamed their rise on a cheat weapon or shamelessly attributed everything to their hard work. He clenched and relaxed his fist, noting that he didn't suffer any damage. He then apologized to the Queen. Sorry, it seems I am unable to divulge the information to you. Just think of it like this. Regriel obtained a mystical treasure that allows him to enslave other people, probably only women. Judging based on how that system looked, it is probably related to enslaving women. Probably named the slave maker system or something. He thought. Fine, the Queen nodded. Then, will you be able to kill Regriel and make General Artika normal once again? I have zero guarantees of being able to kill Regriel. Compass Carburetor said, all systems are plot armors. Something would happen when I am on the verge of killing a system host. Any system user is bound to reach the peak of her life. If you can do it, my kingdom will be indebted to you. You'll be handsomely rewarded for your efforts. The Queen said. Compass Carburetor nodded, showing that he would accept it. That was my plan from the start. But, I need to obtain confidence that I would be able to emerge victorious. And, that would depend on your sincerity. What do you need? The Queen frowned, wondering if he would use this chance to rip her. Teach me your technique, he said. Once I learn that, my chances would be slightly above zero. We don't have time. The longer we delay, the greater the number of talented women he would have enslaved. Compass Carburetor said with a frown, and, it is for the best if you send some men as spies, the most talented in your kingdom, to keep track of Regriel's behavior. That way, I'll be able to prepare accordingly. If he obtains strong, influential companions from Heroica Empire, then it might cause a war if I were to kill them. Compass Carburetor laid down everything openly. And, judging based on what he said, his preparation and the success of this operation would depend entirely on the number of companions Regriel obtains. And, if he obtains anyone other than General Artica, everything Compass Carburetor said would be confirmed as the truth. It was easy to verify. So, after a moment of thought, the Queen nodded, "All right." Chapter 20. Darbel and Darlak. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. But first things first, the Queen said after a moment, slightly feeling awkward as she looked at Compass Carburetor, "Let's introduce ourselves first." She got up, making a mild bow. "I am Ephemelia Entropica, Queen of the Entropica Kingdom. I became queen when I turned 32, and am the strongest puppeteer and warrior of this kingdom. She became queen recently." "So," Compass Carburetor thought as he stood up in return and bowed, "I am Compass Carburetor, Prince of Platopia. I managed my kingdom's wealth." "Follow me, Sir Compass," the Queen, Ephemelia said once they finished eating. Compass Carburetor didn't know what he had eaten. It seemed edible, so he consumed it in a daze. He followed the Queen and arrived at another room where there was a sphere situated on an altar of sorts. Pointing at it, the Queen said, "This is Darbel, a material that's used to harness the energy in our bodies. It also stores the same energy in it and is the basic material in the creation of a puppet or an armament, so, that's why she found out before. I didn't know about Darbel. And it is a common fact everyone in this world ought to know." Compass Carburetor nodded in understanding. The sphere had a radius of 20 centimeters and pulsed with a mysterious feeling. It was transparent like glass, but swirling within it was a faint haze of some sort, varying in all colors of the visible spectrum. "Place your hands on the Darbel and close your eyes. Try to feel it," the Queen said, watching Compass Carburetor execute it exactly, and, just remain in such a state patiently. Allow the energy from it to flow into your body and circulate through it. It will eventually cause your body cells to begin generating this energy too. As long as you're a human, you can obtain this power. Compass Carburetor closed his eyes, keeping his eyes on the Darbel sphere as all he felt was the sense of touch. He couldn't feel anything else. Focus, and perceive it. He remained standing there for almost 4 hours before his arms began to sweat as he felt a prickling sensation all over them. The prickling sensation traversed up his arms and headed to his back, passing through his thighs until it reached his feet. It then continued up his body, passing through his neck before reaching the top of his head, causing him to shudder once. The prickling sensation then headed down his head, arriving at his chest before traversing up his shoulders, returning to his hands before vanishing. A couple of minutes later, the prickling sensation repeated the same course, vanishing once the cycle was done. The process continued to happen continuously. The Queen had been staring at him all along without missing anything. When she noticed his hands begin to sweat after 4 hours, she nodded in surprise. "His perception is extraordinary. It takes people days if not weeks to reach this state. He got it at almost the same time as me." She then noticed goosebumps appear on his hand before traveling over his body. She observed it when the goosebumps passed through his neck and headed up, and watched it return to his hands before vanishing. She mentally kept count of the number of cycles it happened, thinking, "This process will determine his affinity towards Darlak. It only took me 20 cycles before my body began to generate Darlak on its own. An average person needs around 600.800 cycles before attaining the same. I wonder how many cycles you need, Compass Carburetor." Darlak was the name of the energy present within the Darbel and their bodies. It was what they used to control a puppet or wield an armament. At first, the Queen was enthusiastic, but when the number of cycles touched the 3 digits, she was mildly disappointed. Finally, after more than 300 cycles, Compass Carburetor felt something in his body had changed. He felt more nourished, like his stamina was being condensed into a quantizable form. Soon, he could feel something flow through his blood. The pulse felt different as he observed it. "You can open your eyes now," the Queen said. Compass Carburetor opened his eyes and noticed a ring had appeared atop the darble. The color was somewhere between white and yellow, the same as the energy weapons of the soldiers he had witnessed in action the previous day. The ring had a radius of 15 centimeters. And he also observed that the darble was floating a centimeter above the altar now. He didn't know exactly what it signified. "You can remove your hands now," the queen said as he removed his hands, watching the darble slowly land on the altar as the ring atop it vanished. He looked at her. "What does the final action mean?" "When a ring appears atop the darble, it means you have talent in wielding an armament. And, the larger its radius, the greater your affinity to this craft. On average, a person's ring has a radius of 10 centimeters. Yours had 15 centimeters, so you are better than the average. The size of the ring also varies on the size of the darble. If the radius of the ring had been 20 centimeters, as this darble has a radius of 20 centimeters, your affinity to this craft is deemed maximum." She said, "His affinity to wielding the armaments is pretty high, almost on the level of a general. Even I only have an affinity of 18 centimeters. Similarly, when a darble floats in the air, it means you have an affinity towards wielding a puppet. Usually, everyone only has an affinity towards either one. Cases with an affinity towards both crafts are incredibly rare. There are less than 10 such people in this kingdom." The queen smiled. "You'll have a maximum affinity to this craft if this darble floated to a height of 20 centimeters. Yours floated to a centimeter in height, so, you still have some talent in this craft. I thought he would reach my level considering his disposition and temperament. Still, it's a pretty good result considering his kingdom hasn't harnessed this energy before. It means his potential is high." The queen thought. She had never revealed her result to anyone in her kingdom, for that would threaten her position since foreign kingdoms would try to kill her before she grew to become too strong. Publicly, she had an affinity of 5 centimeters for a puppet. But in actuality, she had an affinity of 20 centimeters, the highest for the craft.